The following is my narration of a sample chapter from The Winds of Winter from the point of view of the Forsaken, or as he's also known, Aeron Damphair Greyjoy. It was read out by George R.R. Martin at Balticon recently. Enjoy. The Forsaken. It was always midnight in the belly of the beast. The mutes had robbed him of his robe and cloak. He wore hair and chains and scabs. Salt water sloshed about his legs whenever the tide came in, rising as high as his genitals, only to ebb again when the tide receded. His feet had grown huge and soft and puffy, shapeless things as big as hands. He knew that he was in some dungeon, but not where or for how long. There had been another dungeon before this one, and in between there had been the ship, the Silence. The night they had moved him, he had seen the moon floating on a black wine sea, with a leering face that reminded him of Euron. Rats in the darkness, swimming through the water, they would bite him as he slept and drove him to shouts and thrashings. Aeron's beard and scalp crawled with lice and worms. He could feel them moving through his hair, and the bites itched him intolerably. His chains were so short that he could not reach to scratch. The shackles that held him to the wall were old and rusted and cut into his feet and wrists. When the tide rushed in to kiss them, the salt got into the wounds and made him gasp. When he slept, the darkness would rise up and swallow him, and then the dream would come, and Uri, and the scream of a rusted hinge. The only light in his wet world came from the lanterns visitors brought with them, and it came so seldom that it began to hurt his eyes. A nameless, sour-faced man brought his food. Some beef, as hard as wooden shingles, bread crawling with weevils, slimy, stinking fish. Aeron Damphair gobbled it down and hoped for more, though oft as not he'd retch the meal up after. The man who brought him food was dark, dour, mute. His tongue was gone, Aeron did not doubt. That was Euron's way. The light would leave when the mute did, and once again his world would become a damp darkness, smelling of brine and mould and feces. Sometimes Euron would come himself. Aeron would wake from some dream to find his brother standing over him, lantern in hand. Once, aboard the Silence, he hung the lantern from a post and poured them cups of wine. "Drink with me, brother," he said. That night he wore a shirt of iron scales and a cloak of blood-red silk. His eye patch was red leather, his lips blue.
"Why am I here?"
Aeron croaked at him. His lips were crusty with scabs, his voice hard.
"Where are we sailing?"
"South, for conquest, plunder, dragons, men."
"My place is on the islands."
"Your place is where I want you. I am your king."
"What do you want of me?"
"What can you offer me that I have not had before?" Euron smiled. "I left the islands in the hand of old Eric Ironmaker, and sealed his loyalty with the hand of our sweet Asher. I would not have you preaching against my rule, so I took you with us."
"Release me. The god commands it."
"Drink with me. The king commands it." Euron grabbed a handful of the priest's tangled black hair, pulled his head back, and lifted his wine cup to his lips. But what flowed into his mouth was not wine. It was thick and viscous, with a taste that seemed to change with every swallow, now bitter, now sour, now sweet. When Aeron tried to spit it out, his brother tightened his grip and forced more down his throat. "That's it, priest. Go on, drink it down. The wine of the warlocks, sweeter than your seawater, and more truth in it than all the gods of the earth."
"Curse you,"
Euron said when the cup was empty. Liquid dripped down his chin and onto his long black beard. "If I had the tongue of every man who cursed me, I could make a coat of them." Aeron hawked and spat. The spittle struck his brother's cheek and hung there blue-black, glistening. Euron flicked it off his face with a forefinger, then licked the finger clean. Your god will forgive you tonight. Some god, at least. And then the Damphair slept, sagging in his chains. He heard the creak of a rusted hinge. "Hurry!" he cried. There was no hinge there, no door, no Uri. His brother Euron was long dead, yet there he stood. One arm was black and swollen, stinking with maggots, but he was still Uri, still a boy, no older than the day he'd died. "Do you know what waits below the sea, brother?" "The drowned god," Aeron said, "in watery halls." Uri shook his head. "Worms, worms await you, Aeron." When he laughed, his face sloughed off, and the priest saw that it was not Uri, but Euron's smiling eye, hidden. He showed the world his blood eye now, dark and terrible. Clad head to heel in scale as dark as onyx, he sat upon a mound of blackened skulls, as dwarves capered round his feet, and a forest burned behind him. "The bleeding star bespoke the end," he said to Aeron. "These are the last days, when the world shall be broken and remade, and the new god shall be born from the graves and charnel pits." Then Euron lifted a great horn to his lips and blew, and dragons and krakens and sphinxes came at his command and bowed before him. "Kneel, brother," the crow's eye commanded. "I am your king, I am your god. Worship me, and I will raise you up to be my priest. Never, no godless man may sit the sea-stone chair. Why would I want that hard black rock? Brother, look again and see where I am seated." Aeron Damphair looked. The mound of skulls was gone. Now it was metal underneath the crow's eye. A great tall seat of razor-sharp iron, of barbs and blades and broken swords, all dripping blood. Impaled upon the longer spikes were the bodies of the gods. The maiden was there, and the father, and the mother, and the warrior, and crone and smith, even the stranger. They hung side by side with all manner of queer foreign gods, the great shepherd and the black goat, three-headed Trios and the pale child Bacalon, the lord of light and the butterfly god of Narf, and there swollen in green heft devoured by crabs, the drowned god festered with the red seahorse, still dripping from its hair. Then Euron Crow's Eye laughed again, and the priest woke screaming in the bowels of the silence as piss ran down his leg. It was only a dream, a vision born of foul black wine. The king's moot was the last thing Damphair remembered clearly. As the captains lifted Euron onto their shoulders to take him as their king, the priest had slipped off to find their brother Victarion. "Euron's blasphemies will bring down the drowned god's wrath upon us all," he warned. But Victarion insisted stubbornly that their god had raised their brother up and the gods would cast him down. "He will not act," the priest had realized then. "It must be me." The king's moot had chosen Euron Crow's Eye, but the king's moot was made of men, and men were weak and foolish things, too easily swayed by gold and lies. "I summoned them here, to Naga's bones, to the Grey King's Hall. I called them all together to choose a righteous king, but in their drunken folly they have sinned. It was up to him to undo what they had done. The captains and the kings raised Euron up, but the common folk shall tear him down," he promised Victarion. "I shall go to Great Wick, to Harlaw, Oakmont, to Pike itself. In every town and village shall my words be heard. No godless man may sit the sea-stone chair." After parting from his brother, he'd sought solace in the sea. A few of his drowned men made to follow him, but Aeron sent them off with a few sharp words. He wanted no company but God. Down where longships had been beached upon the stony sand, he found the black salt waves surging in, foamy white where they broke upon a snarled rock half buried in the sand. The water had been icy cold as he waded in, yet Aeron did not flinch from his god's caress. Waves smashed against his chest one after another, staggering him, but he pushed on deeper and deeper until the water wall was breaking over his head. The taste of salt upon his lips was sweeter than any wine. As he moved, a distant roar of the Song of Celebration was coming up from the beach. He heard the faint creak of longships settling upon the strand. He heard the keening of the wind in their lines, and heard the pound of the waves, the hammer of his god calling him into battle. And there and then the drowned god had called him once more, his voice welling up from the depths of the sea. Aeron, my good and faithful servant, you must tell the Ironborn that the Crow's Eye is no true king, that the Seastone chair by rights belongs to... Not Victarion. Victarion had offered himself up to the captains and they had spurned him. Not Asher. In his heart, Aeron had always loved her best of all his brother Balon's children. The drowned god had blessed her with the warrior spirit, but he had cursed her with a woman's body too. No woman had ever ruled the Iron Islands. She should never have made a claim, should have spoken for Victarion, added her own strength to his. It was not too late, Aeron had decided as he shriveled in the sea. If Victarion took Asher for his wife, they could yet rule together, king and queen. In ancient days, each isle had its salt king and its rock king. Let the old way return. Aeron Damphair had struggled back to shore full of fierce resolve. He would bring down Euron, not with sword or axe, but with the power of his faith. Padding lightly across the stones as his hair pressed black and damp across his cheeks, he pushed it back out of his eyes, and that is when they took him. The mutes who had been watching him, waiting for him, stalking him through strand and spray. A hand clamped down across his mouth, and something hard cracked against the back of his skull. The next time he opened his eyes, the Damphair found himself fettered in the darkness. Then came the fever, and the taste of blood in his mouth as he twisted in the chains deep in the bowels of the silence. A weaker man might have wept, but Aeron Damphair prayed. Waking, sleeping, ever in his fever dreams, he prayed. My God is testing me. I must be strong. I must be true. Once, in the dungeon before this one, a woman brought his food in place of Euron's mute. A young thing, buxom and pretty. She dressed in the finery of a Greenland lady. In the lantern light, she was the loveliest thing Aeron had ever seen. Woman, he said, I am a man of God. I command you, set me free. Oh, I couldn't do that, she said, but I have food for you, porridge and honey. She set it beside him on a stool and spooned it into his mouth for him. What is this place? He asked between spoonfuls. My lord father's castle on Oakenshield. The Shield Islands, 1,000 leagues from home. And who are you, child? Thalia Flowers. Are you his natural daughter? I am to be King Euron's salt wife. You and I are to be kinmen. Aeron Damphair raised his eyes to hers, his scabbed lips crusted with wet porridge. Woman, his chains clinked when he moved. Run. He will hurt you. He will kill you. She laughed. Silly. He won't. I'm his love, his lady. He gives me gifts, so many gifts. Silks and furs and jewels, rags and rocks, he calls them. The Crow's Eye puts no value on such things. That was one of the things that drew men to his service. Most captains kept the lion's share of their plunder, but Euron took almost nothing for himself. He gives me any gown I want, the girl was crowing happily. My sisters used to make me wait on them at the table, but Euron made them serve the whole hall naked. Why should he do that except for love of me? She put a hand on her belly and smoothed down the fabric of her gown. I'm going to give him sons. So many sons. He has sons. Base-born boys and mongrels, Euron says. My sons will come before them. He has sworn by your own drowned god. Aeron wept for her. Tears of blood, he thought. You must bear a message to my brother. Not Euron, but Victarion, Lord Captain of the Iron Fleet. Do you know the man I mean? Thalia stepped back from him. Yes, she said. But I couldn't bring him any messages. He's gone. Gone. That was the cruelest blow of all. Gone where? East, she said. With all his ships. He is to bring the dragons to Westeros. I'm to be Euron's salt wife, but my love must have a rock wife too, a queen to rule all Westeros by his side. They say she's the most beautiful woman in the world, and she has dragons. The two of us will be as close as sisters. Aeron Damphair hardly heard her. Victarion is gone, half a world away, or dead. Surely the drowned god was testing him. This was a lesson for him. I must not still trust in men. Only my faith can save me now. That night, when the tide came rushing back into the prison cell, he prayed it might rise all night, enough to end his torment. I have been your true and leal servant, he prayed, listing in his chains. Now snatch me from my brother's hands and take me down beneath the waves to be seated at your side. But no deliverance came, only the mutes to undo his chains and drag him roughly up a long stone stair to where the silence floated on a cold black sea. And a few days later, as her foals shuddered in the grip of some storm, the crow's eye came below again, lantern in hand. This time his other hand held a dagger.
Still praying, priest? Your god has forsaken you.
You're wrong.
It was me who taught you how to pray, little brother. Have you forgotten? I would visit your bedchamber at night when I'd had too much to drink. You shared a room with Euron high up in the sea tower. I could hear you praying from outside the door. I always wondered, were you praying that I would choose you, or that I would pass you by?
Euron pressed the knife to Aeron's throat.
Pray to me. Pray to me to end your torment, and I will.
Not even you would dare, said the Damphair. I am your brother. No man is more cursed than the Kinslayer.
And yet I wear a crown, and you rot in chains. How is it that your drowned god allows that, when I have killed 3 brothers?
Aeron could only gape at him. 3?
Well, if you count half-brothers. Do you remember little Robin? Wretched creature. Do you remember that big head of his, how soft it was? All he could do was mule and shit. He was my second. Harlan was my first. All I had to do was pinch his nose shut. The greyscale had turned his mouth to stone so he could not cry out. His eyes grew frantic as he died. They named me. When the life went out of him, I went out and pissed into the sea and prayed to the god to strike me down. None did. Oh, and Balon was the third, but you knew that. I couldn't do the deed myself, but it was my hand that pushed him off the bridge.
The crow's eye pushed the dagger in a little deeper, and Aeron felt blood trickling down his neck.
If your drowned god did not smite me for killing 3 brothers, why should he bestir himself for the 4th? Because you are his priest?
He stepped back and sheathed his dagger.
No, I'm not killing you tonight, a holy man with holy blood. I may have need of that blood later. For now, you are condemned to live.
Holy man with holy blood, Aeron thought while his brother climbed back up on deck. He mocks me and he mocks the god. Kinslayer, blasphemer, demon in human skin. That night he prayed for his brother's death. It was in the second dungeon that the other holy men began to appear, to share his torment. 3 wore the robes of septons of the Greenlands, and 1 the red garment of a priest of R'hllor. The last was hardly recognizable as a man. Both his hands had been burned down to the bone, and his face was a charred and blackened horror where two blind eyes moved sightlessly above the cracked cheeks, dripping pus. He was dead within hours of being shackled to the wall, but the mutes left his body there to ripen for 3 days afterwards. Last were 2 warlocks of the East, with flesh as white as mushrooms, and lips the purplish blue of a bad bruise, both so gaunt and starved that only skin and bones remained. One had lost his legs. The mutes hung him from a rafter. "Pri!" he cried as he swung back and forth. "Pri! Pri!" Perhaps that was the name of the demon that he worshipped. "The drowned god protects me," the priest told himself. "He is stronger than the other gods that they worshipped, stronger than their black sorceries. The drowned god will set me free." In his saner moments, Aeron questioned why the crow's eye was collecting priests, but he did not think that he would like the answer. Victarion was gone, and with him, hope. Aeron's drowned men likely thought the Damphair was hiding on Old Wick, or Great Wick, or Pike, and wondered when he would emerge to speak against this godless king. Urigon haunted his fever dreams. "You're dead now, Uri," Aeron thought. "Sleep now, child, and trouble me no more. Soon I will come to join you." Whenever Aeron prayed, the legless warlock made queer noises, and his companion babbled wildly in his queer Eastern tongue, though whether they were cursing or pleading, the priest could not say. The Septons made soft noises from time to time as well, but not in words that he could understand. Aeron suspected that their tongues had been cut out. When Euron came again, his hair was swept straight back from his brow, and his lips were so blue that they were almost black. He had put aside his driftwood crown. In its place he wore an iron crown whose points were made from the teeth of sharks. "That which is dead cannot die," said Aeron fiercely. "For he has tasted death once that he never fear again. He was drowned, but he came forth once more with steel and fire." "Will you do the same, brother?" Euron asked. "I think not. I think if I drowned you, you will stay drowned. All gods are lies, but yours is laughable. A pale white thing in the likeness of a man, his limbs bloated and swollen, his hair floating in the water while fish nibble at his face. What fool would worship that?" "He's your god as well," insisted the Damphair. "And when you die, he'll judge you harshly, Crow's Eye. You will spend eternity as a sea slug, crawling on your belly eating shit. If you do not fear to kill your own blood, slit my throat and be done with me. I'm weary of your mad boastings." "Kill my own little brother, blood of my blood, born of the loins of Aeron Greyjoy. Then who would share my triumphs? It tastes sweeter with a loved one by your side." "Your victories are hollow. You cannot hold the shields." "Why should I want to hold them?" His brother's smiling eye glittered in the lantern light, blue and bold and full of malice. "The shields have served my purpose. I took them with one hand and gave them away with the other. A great king is open-handed, brother. It is up to their new lords to hold them now. The glory of winning those rocks will be mine forever. When they are lost, the defeat will belong to the 4 fools who so eagerly accepted my gifts." He moved closer. "Our longships are raiding up the Mander, even to the Arbor and the Redwine Straits. The old way, brother." "Madness! Release me!" Aeron Damphair commanded in his sternest voice, "or risk the wrath of God." Euron produced a soaked skin and a wine cup. "You have a thirsty look about you," he said as he poured. "You need a drink, a taste of evening shade." "No." Aeron turned his face away. "No, I said." "And I said yes." Euron pulled his head back by the hair and forced the vile liquor into his mouth again. Though Aeron clamped his mouth shut by twisting his head from side to side, in the end he had to choke or swallow. The dreams were even worse the second time. He saw the longships of the Ironborn adrift and burning on a boiling blood-red sea. He saw his brother on the Iron Throne again, but Euron was no longer human. He seemed more squid than man, a monster fathered by a kraken of the deep, his face a mass of writhing tentacles. Beside him stood a shadow in woman's form, long and tall and terrible, her hands alive with pale white fire. Dwarves capered for their amusement, male and female, locked in carnal, biting and tearing at each other as Euron and his mates laughed and laughed and laughed. Aeron dreamed of drowning too. What was the bliss that surely followed down in the drowned god's watery halls? It was the terror that even the faithful feel, as the water fills their mouth and nose and lungs, and they cannot draw breath. 3 times the Damphair woke, and 3 times it proved to be no true waking, only another chapter in the dream. But at last there came a day when the door of the dungeon swung open, and a mute came crashing through with no food in his hands. Instead he had a ring of keys in one hand and a lantern in the other. The light was too bright to look upon, and Aeron was afraid of what it meant. Bright and terrible. Something has changed. Something has happened. "Bring them," said a half-familiar voice in the hapless gloom. "Be quick about it. You know how he gets." "Oh, I do. I've known since I was a boy." One Septon made a frightening noise as he undid his chains, some half-choked sound that might have been some attempt at speech. The legless warlock hanging stared down at the black water, his lips moving silently in prayer. When the mute came for Aeron, he tried to struggle, but the strength had gone from his limbs, and one blow was all it took to quiet him. His wrist was unshackled and the other free from itself. When he tried to take a step, his ancient legs folded out from under him. Not one of the prisoners was fit enough to walk. In the end, the mutes had to summon more of their kind. 2 of them grasped Aeron by the arm and dragged him up the spiral stair. His feet banged against the steps as he ascended, sending stabbing pains up his leg. He bit his lips to keep from crying out. The priest could hear the warlocks babbling just behind them. The Septon brought up the rear, sobbing and gasping. With every turn of the stair, the steps grew brighter until finally a window appeared in the left-hand wall. It was only a slit in the stone, no bare hands ripped across, but that was wide enough to emit a shaft of sunlight. So golden, the Damphair thought. So beautiful. When they pulled him up the steps into the light, he felt a warmth upon his face, and tears rolled down his cheeks. The sea! I can smell the sea! The drowned god has not abandoned me. The sea will make me whole again. That which is dead can never die, but rises again, harder and stronger. "Take me to the water," he commanded as if he was still back on the Iron Islands, surrounded by his drowned men, but the mutes were his brother's creatures, so they paid him no heed. They dragged him down another set of stone steps, through a torchlit gallery, and into a bleak stone hall, where a dozen bodies were hanging from the rafters, turning and swaying. A dozen of Euron's captives were gathered in the hall, drinking wine beneath the corpses. Left-hand Lucas Cod sat in the place of honour, wearing a heavy silken tapestry as a cloak. Beside him was the Red Oarsman, and further down pitch-faced John Mayer, Stonehand, and Ruggin Saltbeard.
"Who are these dead?"
Aeron demanded. His tongue was so thick, the words came out in a rusty whisper, faint as a mouse breaking wind. "They are those who helped the Lord hold this castle, his kin." The voice belonged to Torwald Browntooth, one of his brother's captives, a creature near as vile as the Crow's Eye himself. "Pigs," said another vile creature, the one they called the Red Oarsman. "This was their isle, a rock just off the harbour. They dared oink threats at us. Red wine, oink. Hightower, oink. Tyrell, oink, oink, oink."
so he sent them squealing down to hell. The arbour. Not since the drowned god had blessed him with a second life had Aeron Damphair ventured so far from the Iron Islands. This is not my place. I do not belong here. I should be among my drowned men, preaching against the crow's eye. Have your gods been good to you down in the dark? Asked Left-Hand Lucas Cod. One of the warlocks snarled some answer in his ugly eastern tongue.
I curse you all,
Aeron said. Your curses have no power here, priest, said Left-Hand Lucas Cod. The crow's eye has fed your drowned god well, and he has grown fat with sacrifice. Words are wind, but blood is power. We have given thousands to the sea, and he has given us victories. Count yourself blessed, Damphair, said Stonehand. We are going back to sea. The red wine fleet creeps closer towards us. The winds have been against them rounding dawn, but they are finally near enough to have emboldened the old woman in Old Town. So now Leighton Hightower's sons move down the Whispering Sound with hopes of catching us in the rear. You know what it's like to be caught in the rear, don't you? Said the Red Oarsman, laughing. Take them to the ships, Torwald Browntooth commanded. And so Aeron Damphair returned to the salt sea. A dozen longships were drawn up at the wharf below the castle, twice as many beached along the strand. Familiar banners streamed from their masts, the Greyjoy Kraken, the Bloody Moon of Winch, the Warhorn of the Good Brothers, but from their sterns flew a flag the priest had never seen before, a red eye with a black pupil, beneath an iron crown escorted by 2 crows. Beyond them a host of merchants' ships floated on a tranquil turquoise sea. Cogs, carracks, fishing boats, even a great cog, a soul and soul of a ship, as big as a leviathan. Prizes of war, the Damphair knew. Euron Crowseye stood up on the deck of Silence, clad in a suit of black scaled armour like nothing Aeron had ever seen before. Dark as smoke it was, but Euron wore it as easy as if it was the finished silk. The scales were edged in red gold that gleamed and shimmered when he moved. Patterns could be seen within the metal, walls and glyphs and arcane symbols moulded into steel. Valyrian steel, the Damphair knew. His armour is Valyrian steel. In all the 7 kingdoms, no man owned a suit of Valyrian steel. Such things had been known 400 years ago, in the days before the Doom, and even then they would have cost a kingdom. Euron did not lie. He's been to Valyria. No wonder he was mad. Your Grace, said Torwald Browntooth, I have the priests. What do you want done with them? Bind them to the prows, Euron commanded. My brother on the Silence. Take one for yourself. Let them dice for the others. One to a ship. Let them feel the spray, the kiss of the drowned god, wet and salty. This time the mutes did not drag him below. Instead they lashed him to the prow of the Silence beside the figurehead, a naked maiden, slim but strong, with outstretched arms and wind-blown hair, but no mouth below her nose. They bound Aeron Damphair tight with strips of leather that would shrink when wet, clad only in his beard and breechcloth. The crow's eye spoke a command. A black sail was raised. Lines were cast off and the Silence backed away from shore to the slow beat of the oarmaster's drum. Oars rising and dipping and rising again, churning the water. Above them the castle was burning. Flames leapt from the open windows. When they were well out to sea, Euron returned to him. Brother, he said, you look forlorn. I have a gift for you. He beckoned and 2 of his bastard sons dragged a woman forward and bound her to the prow on the other side of the figurehead. Naked as the mouthless maiden, her smooth belly just beginning to swell with the child she was carrying, her cheeks red with tears. She did not struggle as the boys tightened the bonds. Her hair hung down in front of her face, but Aeron knew her all the same. Thalia flowers, he called. Have courage, girl. All this will be over soon, and we'll feast together in the drowned god's watery halls. The girl raised up her head but made no answer. She had no tongue to answer with, the Damphair knew. He licked his lips and tasted salt. Wow, there have been some great chapters released from the Winds of Winter so far, but this one is my personal favourite. Thanks to the Angry GOT fan website for transcribing this chapter, allowing me to make this video. I'll now begin work on a chapter review and breakdown video for this chapter, and after that I'll finish off my past, present and future of Jaqen H'gar video. In the meantime, why not check out my other videos so far, on Mormont's Raven throughout the series, the Tansy mystery in A Storm of Swords, and the tinfoil wrapped question of did Summer see a dragon at Winterfell in A Clash of Kings. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to see all that content as soon as it's released. If you don't usually watch A Song of Ice and Fire videos on YouTube and only came here in search of the new chapter, why not check some out while you're here? There's lots of great content available, and I link to all these channels in the descriptions of my videos. Three that I recommend in particular are Preston Jacobs, Alt-Shift-X and Teflon TV. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Cheers.